If there's a grain out there that had a bit of a cult following, it is definitely this month's grain for our Grains Explorer Challenge, our very last one of the year. It's another ancient grain that has become very popular, but frankly, there's a bit of misinformation out there about it. Which means that I'm going to be correcting some of that, which means I'm probably going to be lighting a bit of a fire in the comment section below. We're going to be diving in deep today to finding the truth about one of these most beloved ancient grains, Einkorn. Hey y'all, welcome back to Grains and Grit. My name is Felicia, and on this channel, we talk all things real whole grains from a biblical perspective. I teach you how to be milling your wheat, your other grains, consuming whole grains, how to bake your bread, how to cook with whole foods, all of that stuff. That's your jam. Be sure to subscribe to this channel. Now, as I mentioned, this is another video for our Grains Explorer Challenge, and it's our last one here for 2024. This is the final video for our Grains Explorer Challenge, where this year, every single month, we have been exploring a different grain to help us expand our horizons and to learn more and dive deep into one particular grain for that month. And as I stated, this month's grain is Einkorn. I saved one of the most requested ones for last. Now, anyone can join this Grains Explorer Challenge, but for the full adventure, you gotta check out the Grainy Bunch. My Grainies are an awesome bunch of people. They are diehard fans, and they actually get the full adventure. So the Grainy Bunch actually receives extra recipes. We do Zoom video calls every month, which is a lot of fun to be able to see y'all face to face. You also have access to me, more personal access to me. So when you ask questions, I'm able to answer them a lot faster, and they are the ones who get the priority for me. And we just have a lot of fun. They get extra recipes, bonus content, and more. So be sure to check out the Grains Explorer Challenge. Just go to grainsandgrit.com/grainsexplorer. That's also where you can find out more about the Grainy Bunch and sign up there as well. And if you are new to our Grains Explorer Challenge and you want to catch up on all the grains that we have done for 2024, then be sure to check out this playlist up here. As usual, we will be covering 1, a general overview and history of Einkorn. Number 2, its nutritional benefits. Number 3, bonus, is talking about a little bit of misinformation out there about Einkorn. And so I'm going to be upsetting some people, and we'll do that the third one, so you're going to want to stay tuned. Number 4 is what Einkorn is used for. And then the 5th one, of course, is how I use Einkorn in my kitchen, some tips and tricks, some ideas for you to do this month. But first of all, be sure to comment below. Let me know what your experience with Einkorn is. Love it, hate it, excited to try it, crazy expensive, I understand. Let me know in the comments below. Okay, so first up, a general overview and history of Einkorn. So a very fun fact about Einkorn, and one thing that is definitely you see a lot if you go to purchase Einkorn, is that it is considered man's original wheat. Yes, it is the oldest version of wheat that we have available. Einkorn and emmer is believed to be the original wheats that were consumed and domesticated by humankind. So with that being said, I'm sure you can figure it out if you know your history, where it's from. It's generally from the Fertile Crescent, and it grows wild still to this day, predominantly in Turkey. So basically what we can tell through archaeology, and it's been kind of confirmed, is there is wild Einkorn and then there's domesticated Einkorn, which leads to the fact that Einkorn is actually not really, hasn't really been messed with through all of these thousands of years, and we'll explain why in just a minute, but it generally has not been hybridized. It is one of the original, like pretty much what we have now is extremely close to the wild Einkorn that they have, and based on they trace back DNA and all the things to show that it is basically the original wheat. Unlike whenever you go over to say spelt, which is technically a hybrid, and same thing with emmer, those are technically hybridized because it is the wild wheat that has been hybridized with a wild goat grass. So now, does that make Einkorn more superior? Not necessarily, and we will get to that in point number 3. Now, the main difference between the wild einkorn and the domesticated einkorn really comes down to the seed heads. Wild einkorn, whenever the seed heads fall off, they burst, thus allowing the seeds to be distributed so they will grow. It's how God designed it to be. Domesticated einkorn, humans basically domesticated it where those seed heads are a bit tighter. So if it does fall, we don't lose the grain. The wheat actually has to be threshed out or like beaten, things like that. So it was actually easier for man to harvest and to grow. That's why it became a bit more domesticated. And again, this was just traits that they were able to work out all on their own, no laboratory needed. Domesticated einkorn seeds are a little bit larger than the wild version, which is pretty normal anytime you domesticate anything. And then also the thing with domesticated einkorn is it does require humanity or man to keep it alive, because as I stated, those seeds are not going to really come apart from that hard husk. And if that doesn't happen, that means the seeds are not planted and the plant will not survive. So as I mentioned, that it is seen as the only wheat that has never truly been hybridized. And if you're wondering how in the world that can happen over thousands of years, because if you've watched other videos where I talk about the difference between genetically modified and hybridization, hybridization happens naturally. Like it can happen all on its own. It's how God designed plants, animals, humans to survive throughout all these different changing environments. The main reason that it hasn't been hybridized is because einkorn kind of self-pollinates. It does not pollinate very rapidly or quickly with others. It just pollinates itself, which leads to just not needing to really be hybridized. So as I mentioned, definitely traces back to the Fertile Crescent, which is generally what we know is where humanity began. And from the Fertile Crescent, it then spread into the Caucasus, the Balkans, and then to Central Europe, and is commonly grown in cooler climates. Now, it did start to decline in favor of emmer wheat, which was easier to harvest, to separate the husk from the seed, all of that. So even back in ancient Egypt, we do see that ancient Egyptians actually were preferring to grow emmer. And so it just started kind of die off in favor of other grains like emmer and spelt, eventually durum, those type of grains, but it was still being grown into the 20th century and definitely through medieval times into the 20th century, but it just wasn't very popular. And a fun fact about einkorn, and you've probably heard this story before if you've tried to look and purchase einkorn, find out all about it, is that it actually was confirmed of how ancient of a grain that is and how close it is to the original einkorn that it was thousands of years ago, because back in 1991, some hikers were in the northern Italian Alps and they discovered a dead man, a frozen ice man sticking out of a glacier that was melting. They have named him Otzi, the Iceman. I hope that's how you pronounce it, based on just the region where he was from. And lo and behold, he actually had undigested food in his mouth, and it consisted of ibex meat, roots, berries, and einkorn. Which I would like to point out that this proves that we have been eating meat, grains, fruits and vegetables, those type of things all together for a very long time. So take that, carnivore-only people. Now, it's actually harder to nail down who actually are the top producers of einkorn because it's still not grown a lot. It is more difficult to grow, to harvest, so just not as many people, not as many farmers are growing it. But you can find it here in the United States, in Canada, you can also find in Italy. And in fact, it became popular again thanks to Jovial Foods, who you may have heard of, who's done a lot of work to actually help bring back the popularity of einkorn as a really great wheat to consume. And that's why einkorn typically is probably the most expensive grain to buy. It's just a simple matter of supply and demand. The fact that the supply just isn't that high, but the demand is pretty popular, but just because there's just not as much supply, that's why einkorn, when you look at the pricing, might give you a mild heart attack. But many thanks to Jovial Foods and all the work that they have done. Carla has done a lot of work. I know that she has since passed away, but I think it is because of her and other people who've really brought back the popularity of einkorn, which is why I think we have more of it in supply today. Okay, so number 2, the nutritional benefits of einkorn. Y'all, it's a whole grain, okay? And if you've been around for a bit, you know that we generally have the same great and wonderful uses, nutritional benefits that comes from whole grains. And that includes high amounts of fiber. You also have great amounts of iron and potassium and magnesium and phosphorus. You also have your wonderful B vitamins, vitamin E, all of those delicious goodness. Very, very similar with whole grains, a lot of those. But einkorn actually shines in a couple of areas. And one nutrient that einkorn actually has a bit more of is a word that I'm probably about to butcher because it's the carotenoids. Carotenoids? Basically what that is they're antioxidants that give fruits and vegetables that red, yellow, and orange color. Specifically, it is very high in lutein, which is an antioxidant actually found in your eye, and it actually is known to protect your retina from damage and aging. Now, you will see that it actually is higher in protein, but this does not necessarily translate to the ability to produce good gluten in order to form really great high, tall yeast spreads. So just know, in case you didn't know, no grains have gluten. Nothing has gluten. Gluten is formed based on proteins in these wheats and grains that contain it. So little minor technicality there. So basically it does have the proteins that do make gluten like all wheats do, but the type of proteins that it has does not produce strong enough gluten for your typical really high yeast spreads. And we'll be talking about how to be using einkorn and the challenges that come with it later, but this does lead to number 3. The big one. We're going to be talking about some misinformation out there about einkorn that I have found that kind of irritates me a little bit as someone who focuses solely on whole grains. We need to clear some things up, okay, y'all? So buckle up, buttercup, and pay attention. The biggest thing is the fact that when you go out there, and all my research with einkorn in preparation for this video is everyone talks about how einkorn is superior. It is an ancient grain, it is man's original wheat, and it is far superior than our modern wheats, and how people are able to consume einkorn and are not able to handle our modern wheats. The problem with this is pretty much everyone would just lump in our modern wheat, and no one was actually distinguishing if we're talking about the flour or if we're talking about the wheat in itself. Absolutely, I 100% agree that white flour is bad. White flour that we are consuming nowadays, doesn't matter what wheat or grain it is from. When you highly refine a grain and you're taking out the bran and the germ and all of the beneficial nutrients that God put in there to help you digest it, then yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all that you have issues with it. And that doesn't matter if that is our modern hard red, hard white wheats, or if it is an ancient grain. If you take out those nutrients that God put in to help your body handle this grain, doesn't surprise me at all that you have problems. And most people are never talking about that. I never saw anyone actually distinguish between true whole grains and einkorn. Let's compare apples to apples. Let's compare milling hard red wheat, which is a modern wheat, to milling einkorn wheat as an ancient grain. And let's see how it works. For most people, with the many testimonies that I've received, many people who have gluten sensitivities, gluten intolerance, they are not able to handle your typical store-bought bread, dead flour from the store. Not surprising. But many of these people who have these sensitivities have been able to go straight to milling their own grains, even with our modern wheats, and not have any issues with it. So it's just a very annoying thing. It's how misinformation gets out there. People thinking that, oh, if I buy all-purpose einkorn flour, then I'm going to be totally fine and okay. And this is better than the white flour. And yeah, it probably is better than the white flour, but that doesn't mean that a modern wheat is bad. It's bad if you're refining it, not if you're milling it whole. Another big argument that they use to state that einkorn is superior is the fact that it has 14 chromosomes as opposed to modern wheat containing 42 chromosomes. Now, I am not a geneticist, and if there is a geneticist, please enlighten us in the comments below, because this information has been hard for me to nail down, like what exactly does that mean? Is that necessarily? And I do not believe that that necessarily means something is bad. Now, I do know enough to know that, say in humans, if you have one extra chromosome, like that chromosome, I think it's 21, that can produce Down syndrome. So I do understand that when you mess with the chromosomes, that can certainly result in some sort of deficiency, deformity, something going on. I do understand that, but I do not believe that that's necessarily the case when it comes to wheat. Just because einkorn has 14 chromosomes and our modern wheat has 42 chromosomes, I don't really see where that's necessarily a bad thing, because our modern wheat is still wheat. It's not deformed. It still contains the B vitamins, the vitamin E, like all of these things. It has been hybridized by man, not genetically modified. Well, kind of has. See this video here, but Brazil. So all that I know is I did do this type of research where let's compare it to modern apples have 17 chromosomes, but geneticists traced back the ancestor to apples having 9 chromosomes. And no one's talking about how modern apples are absolutely horrible and are causing all of these problems. So I do not think that argument is valid. Again, I have really tried to research this out. If any of you actually know more about genetics than I do, feel free to comment down below what this means. But from what I can tell, I do not think that that is a strong and valid argument of why einkorn is superior than our modern wheat, just based on how many chromosomes that it has. But I'm open to being told otherwise. Another bit of misinformation that can be a bit misleading out there is the fact that they state that einkorn has never been hybridized. This is not necessarily a bad thing that it's never been hybridized, but hybridization in and of itself, as I mentioned earlier, is not a bad thing. God designed for plants, animals, and even humans to be able to hybridize so we can adapt to our environment. The world today is not how God created it back in the Garden of Eden. This world is not even like it was when Noah stepped off the flood, which was another drastic change from the pre-flood world. And again, y'all, I'm a Bible believer, so I do believe the Bible. That is our history and is 100% accurate. So for those of you who do not believe this, then this is not really going to matter to you maybe. But I think even you can agree that the world is not the same as it was thousands of years ago. However many years you think this world is, the world is not. The world has changed. The fact that, look at how many colors that we have, that humanity has, the different hair types that we have. There's so much variety, and that is all just hybridization. And it happens. Same thing with our plants and animals. Bananas today aren't what they used to be. Apples today aren't what they used to be. Same thing with everything is fine. Our cows are hybridized. It's just a way for things to survive. Mankind, humanity has been doing it to get traits that we like. So just to state that something has never been hybridized does not mean that it is superior or better. Maybe in some small way it is, but overall, let's remember hybridization is not a bad and evil thing. Another huge piece of misinformation out there is they state, and I have to look at my notes, einkorn wheat berries are smaller than modern wheat because modern wheat is bred to produce more gluten. I actually did read this in Carla Bartolucci, the founder of Jovial Foods, in her Einkorn cookbook. And I'll go ahead and tell you, just from my experience with grains, this is actually not true. Einkorn wheat is small. But you know what other wheat is actually larger than that? That is kamut. Kamut, I would say, is actually the largest of the wheat berries, and that is an ancient grain. Kamut and Corzon, they are significantly larger than einkorn and even our modern wheats. So that's just completely false to say that because a grain is smaller than other grains means that it's better. It's just wrong, because again, kamut is a very ancient grain, but it's the largest. And I would say that einkorn is actually roughly the same size as, say, some of my soft white wheat berries. It is smaller, but there are also other grains that are smaller than that. And so that's just not correct. Sorry, no offense, just not correct. Now, as far as it producing, modern wheats producing more gluten than einkorn, as I stated, no wheats have gluten. They have proteins that come together that produce gluten. And there is something to this where einkorn does not produce this the same type of gluten as like our hard red or hard white, even spelt, those type of grains. That doesn't make it more superior necessarily. And in fact, in Sue Becker's book, Home Milling Guide, I can't remember the name right now. It's this one up here. I'll link it below. But she states in her book that no scientists have actually, there are no research studies out there to actually show that the different wheats producing the amount of gluten that they do actually react different ways with human beings. So in other words, I think if you're milling your own wheat, you're consuming it whole, then it doesn't matter the different types, how the gluten comes out, you should be fine. It's not the types of gluten that comes out. I know this sounds really weird, but it leads to the next one where they also state that einkorn does not have the d-chromosome, which seems to be connected with wheat intolerance in many humans. So again, that probably is true that einkorn does not have this d-chromosome. I am unsure if this one has truly been linked with wheat intolerance because again, they are not comparing apples to apples. They are just stating this, but not actually talking about, okay, well, what if you mill it yourself? What if you mill modern wheat that has the d-chromosome? Like maybe that's why people are having issues because they're consuming white flour instead of whole grains. Again, I want to say all of this to say that if you are truly a celiac, if you have true celiacs, none of this applies to you because you cannot have einkorn anyway, because you cannot have any grain that has gluten in it, period. Doesn't matter if it's ancient, modern, or well in between. So just know for all my celiacs out there, I'm not talking to you, but considering that is less than 1% of the population right now, most likely I'm not talking to you. Okay, so that's just kind of the misinformation out there. I hope this all kind of makes sense, but bottom line, I think the biggest thing that we need to understand is we need to separate out the difference of what it means to be milling your grains yourself, consuming whole wheat, actually true whole grain, whether it's modern wheat or ancient wheat. You should be milling all of your wheats and all of your grains to make flour, and not be consuming just regular all-purpose flour where the nutrients are lost. And that is the thing that I want to leave you with, is just be milling grains yourself. Now, number 4, what is einkorn used for? Nothing special with this because it's used for food. Baking pasta, breads, eaten whole. So there's really no other uses, like with other grains where they may be used in the pharmaceutical world or animal feed, things like that. Einkorn is just for us to eat. Yay. All right, so let's talk about how to be using einkorn in your kitchen. And I'm really excited to be experimenting more with this grain because I haven't used it a lot in my kitchen. But let me tell you about the experience that I have. First of all, einkorn, like kamut, is tricky to work with. It is very, very sticky. It can be very, very tacky. It absorbs oils and waters and fats differently than your typical wheats. I do not recommend this grain right off for beginners, especially milling it whole. But in saying that, I actually do recommend this book. Now, the information she gives at the beginning, I've kind of tabbed it, where some of that misinformation I talked about, she does talk about it in here, and I disagree. But I do recommend this book. I will be working with some recipes here because she does give helpful information dealing with einkorn, both whole grain or the all-purpose einkorn flour. And the biggest thing is I do recommend that you take the time to read the introduction where she's telling you how einkorn works. And she specifically talks about the difference between whole grain einkorn and all-purpose einkorn, so you know how to adjust the recipes. But I will definitely be going through this and using it. But I have already been using it in my kitchen, and some things that I've noticed is they make delicious rolls, very, very tacky and sticky and kind of difficult to work with, but super soft. And my husband even states that they are very close, almost like a sourdough flavor, just all on its own. I just use my regular roll recipe. I just use einkorn, but it's such a, it's a delicious nutty flavor. It's a wonderful, wonderful flavor that almost is very close to a sourdough type flavor. I've also used it making gravy for Thanksgiving. I've made my gravy with it, and I noticed that because einkorn mills very, very fine, it mills very fine all on its own. And so with that, incorporate it into my gravy very, very well. Usually whenever I'm using like other wheats for my gravy, I can always like kind of see that bran and germ in there, or it's just a little speckled. Not a big deal, it still tastes delicious. But in this, you couldn't tell at all. You would have thought I used all-purpose flour because it was just so smooth. So it definitely did excellent in my gravies. But the biggest thing is that it is very tacky and sticky and needs some adjustments when working with your recipes. So again, I do recommend this. You can substitute one for one pretty much, but there may need to be adjustments with the liquids and with the fats. So we'll be linking this book below, and I'm hoping to shoot a video of me testing some recipes out because I'm really excited. So there you go, y'all. Einkorn, the final grain for our Grains Explorer Challenge, and I'm so excited that you've been with me throughout this whole challenge. And let me know again below what your experience with Einkorn is, if you love it and you hate it. I will also link below where to find this grain because not everyone carries it. Thank you so very much for following me on this Grains Explorer Challenge. My Grainies, you know, I love you. Look for those extra recipes in your member portal, and grainsandgrit.com/grainsexplorer is where you need to go to learn all about this Grains Explorer Challenge. And if you need to catch up on all the grains that we have, then be sure to check out this playlist right here to catch up on all the grains that you have missed. As always, I hope you'll have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next week. Bye.